Okay, so if we could just prepare ourselves in the usual way of sitting up nice and straight in our chairs, keeping the spine as straight as possible. And just take 2 or 3 deep breaths. And just breathe in peace and harmony. And with the out-breath, just let go of any thoughts, any cares that you might have. And breathe in relaxation. And breathe out any stress, any tension that you might have. There's nothing you need to think about, nowhere that you need to go, just to allow yourself to be here in the present moment, the only moment that there is. And we'll begin now with the head and neck and breathing exercises. And now the Lord's Prayer, which is a prayer of protection and a prayer of attunement. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And now, an affirmation. Be still and know that I am one with God. And now another prayer of protection. As we open our hearts to the unseen forces that surround the throne of grace, beauty, and might, we throw about ourselves the protection found in the thought of the Christ. And now if we could just enter into the silence of meditation for about 8 to 10 minutes. Could you end your meditations now and bring your awareness back to your room? And Father, Mother God, Christ Jesus, we ask that the energies that we have raised during our meditation may now go out to those who have need of prayer support, of healing, wherever that healing is needed, whatever form it may take. We offer it to Thee. You know who has need, and only You can heal. Thank you, Father. Chapter 6, Who Are We? An approach to meditation such as proposed in previous chapters must have a rationale based on a thorough definition of the nature of human existence. Without such a foundation, meditation, dealing as it does with so many aspects of human nature, can be interpreted by many people as magic or cultish ritual with no objective validity. However, once we have agreed to embrace the fundamental concepts of the nature of our humanness as defined by the sources used in this book, the validity of universal aspects of meditation is more apparent, cutting across many cultures and traditions. Most disagreements about theories or techniques relating to education, child rearing, meditation, or whatever can better be approached by first addressing the question, as human beings, who are we? Of course, this question cannot be answered simply. The sources for this book offer many concepts, each of which gives a partial answer. Together, they create a comprehensive foundation for our approach to meditation. This statement of the nature of humanity consists of 6 points. Point 1. All life, indeed all that exists, is a manifestation of the one creative energy, which is God. All force is one force. Although the universe has only one energy, that energy manifests in many forms. For example, the energy of electricity and the energy that one uses when afraid is the same energy. The energy of an atomic reaction and the energy used in joyful enthusiasm are simply different manifestations of this one energy. We can easily fall into the illusion that we have a certain amount of work energy, a certain amount of sexual energy, and a certain amount of anger energy. And we can believe that these energies can be expressed only in these particular forms. Whenever we believe that we cannot transform energy that might be expressed negatively into a more creative or loving expression, we accept the notion of many gods. Contrast this with the awareness of the oneness of God. Lama Govinda, 1969, page 64, refers to this principle in pointing out the discrepancy in appearance between a diamond and a lump of coal. However, both consist of the same chemical substance, carbon. This demonstrates the fundamental unity of all life and its inherent capacity for transformation. All existing elements or phenomena are only variations of the same force or substance. Therefore, he who succeeds in penetrating to the purity of its undifferentiated primordial form has gained the key to the secret of all creative power, which is based on the mutability of all elements and phenomena. Govinda, 1969, page 51. For all force, all power that is manifested in thyself is of the one source. Cayce reading 1494-1. Point 2. Every individual is a spiritual being, yet is not aware of the totality of that being. We have projected ourselves into a lesser dimension, a more limited state of consciousness that can be described as three-dimensional. We measure our experience in terms of three variables. A, when an experience happens, time. B, where it happens, space. And C, the degree of understanding we have or the response we make to the experience. The Cayce readings refer to this third dimension as patience, for example in reading 262-114. Often we describe the world as having the three dimensions of length, width, and depth. Time is commonly spoken of as the fourth dimension. However, in this system, length, width, and depth are subdimensions of space, while time has the subdimensions of past, present, and future. Because we operate in a three-dimensional frame of reference, we tend to perceive or conceptualize in threes. For example, we see ourselves as having a body, mind, and spirit, or soul. Many understand the Godhead as a trinity, for example, in Christianity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The triune concept is based upon an underlying unity. But because we are in this particular dimension of awareness, it is helpful for us to deal with these triune concepts in many of our beliefs and perceptions. Several sources used in this book provide examples of this three-part conceptualization. The Cayce readings refer to the mind as consisting of the superconscious, the part still in contact with the infinite, the subconscious, the storehouse of memory of all experiences, and the conscious or waking physical consciousness, for example in reading 900-16. This concept has been interpreted as a model of the nature of humanity. And this figure 1 from Puryear and Thurston, 1978, page 24, shows the difference in variations between the superconscious, subconscious, and conscious states of awareness. And I think the readings described a child's drawing of the sun with all of these little triangles around the outer edges, which this is just one of those little triangles, so that the superconscious is all one big space connecting all of us. The Secret of the Golden Flower describes three levels of man's activity which have been interpreted as eros, intuition, and logos. The way to the elixir of life knows as supreme magic, seed water, spirit fire, and thought earth, these three. What is seed water? It is the true one energy of former heaven, eros. Spirit fire is the light, logos. And thought earth is the heavenly heart of the middle dwelling, intuition. From Wilhelm, 1962, pages 25 and 26. Govinda presents a three-part model that is very similar. Writing about the spiritual centres of the body, see chapter 8, he categorises their activity into three sections. These three zones represent, in their deepest sense, 1, the terrestrial plane, namely that of earthbound elementary forces of nature, or materiality, or corporeality. 2, the cosmic or universal plane of eternal laws of timeless knowledge, a plane of spontaneous spiritual awareness of the infinite. And 3, the human plane of individual realization, in which the forces of the earth and of the universe, which become conscious in the human soul as an ever-present and deeply felt reality. Govinda, 1969, page 175. The first zone may be compared to seed water and the conscious mind. The second zone, the spirit fire and the superconscious mind. And the third zone, the thought earth and the subconscious mind. As spiritual beings, we were meant to experience lesser dimensions in consciousness and to bring the qualities of our spiritual nature fully into manifestation in these limited states of awareness. The fall of man, representing our descent into a materialized sense of ourselves, is not really a spatial description, but a process of awareness, focusing more and more upon material forms and sensations associated with the body, and the exclusion of awareness related to the spiritual or infinite aspect of being. We find ourselves with a sense of our own dual nature as an individual of the spirit and as an individual of the earth. This dual nature is described in The Secret of the Golden Flower. Each individual contains a central monad, which at the moment of conception splits into life and human nature, Ming and Hsing. These two are supra-individual principles, and so can be related to eros and logos. In the personal bodily existence of the individual, they are represented by two other polarities, a po, soul or anima, and a hun, soul or animus. All during the life of the individual, these two are in conflict, each striving for mastery. If the life energy flows downward, that is, without let or hindrance into the outer world, the anima is victorious over the animus. No spirit body or golden flower is developed, and at death the ego is lost. If the life energy is led through the backward flowing process, that is, conserved and made to rise instead of allowed to dissipate, the animus has been victorious and the ego persists after death. Wilhelm, 1962, pages 64 and 65. Our work on earth is to re-experience the full consciousness of our own infinite nature, brought about only as we bring the awareness of the infinite into the finite. It is not enough for us to run away from our limitations and humanness to embrace the infinite, or to seek a way by which our finite nature can be swallowed in an ocean of oneness. The real goal is expressed by Govinda and by Stanford. Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia ends with the words, "The dewdrop slips into the shining sea." If this beautiful simile is reversed, it would probably come nearer to the Buddhist conception of ultimate realization. It is not the drop that slips into the sea, but the sea that slips into the drop. The universe becomes conscious in the individual, but not vice versa. Govinda, 1969, page 81. Some have said that the uniqueness of Christ as Jesus was that a man became conscious of God, that an individual became conscious of God. But we would now give a greater significance. God became conscious as an individual. This is why you are in the earth, not to become conscious of God, for you were that before entering the earth. Not that, as many religions and people believe, but that God would become conscious as man, that God would become an individual. There is a difference. One is a transformation, an amelioration, the purpose for which he entered. The other is, well, merely returning the pancake to its batter. Stanford, 1976, page 200. The process of the infinite expressing in the finite must begin at the point in consciousness in which we find ourselves. To reverse the descent into matter, Govinda advises, we must proceed in the reverse order in which we came to the present state. He warns against trying to achieve the infinite state of being before we have done all we can to attune and purify the finite aspects of body and mind. Not that one should ignore the spiritual dimension of seeking and work only on the physical and mental. As discussed in chapter 1, setting a spiritual ideal before beginning any attempt to transform the body and mind is very important. Instead, Govinda cautions us to beware of two related temptations. One, to assume that we may leave behind the finite expressions of our being, which we have built in the earth, and two, to hope to find ourselves on the top of the mountain without having traversed its foot. Point 3. Anytime the one energy is expressed in the physical world, it will have form patterned by the mind. The energy takes on a pattern, shape, or vibration given to it by the mind. As the one energy is given a form, we can begin to speak of it objectively or refer to a thought as a thing. The mental activity called desire creates a vibrational pattern with the one energy that is just as real as acting out the desire in the material world. For thoughts are things, and they have their effect upon individuals, especially those that become supersensitive to outside influences. These are just as physical as sticking a pin in the hand. Cayce reading 386-2. And so mind is the mediator between the pure life-giving energy and its manifestation, between the spirit and the physical. With the mind, we can modify the way this energy is expressed in the earth. As the mediator, mind partakes of both that which is temporal and that which is eternal, of the finite nature of the physical body and the infinite nature of spirit. The relationship of manas, mind, to empirical consciousness and universal consciousness, is, as shown in figure 2, is described here. Manas, mind, is that element of our consciousness which holds the balance between the empirical individual qualities on the one side and the universal spiritual qualities on the other. It is that which either binds us to the world of the senses or which liberates us from it. Govinda, 1969, page 75. And the diagram, the relationship of matters to empirical consciousness and universal consciousness, shows that the mind, manas, partakes of both. It's the mediator between the two. Thus, our work in being in the earth is to bring the infinite or spiritual into manifestation in the three-dimensional world. Being the mediator between the two, the mind is the primary agent of transformation. Point 4. The patterning activities of the mind can be understood as being fourth dimensional. We find this concept in both the Cayce readings and in the writings of Carl Jung. Best definition that ever may be given of the fourth dimension is an idea. Where will it project? Anywhere. Where does it arise from? Who knows? Where will it end? Who can tell? It is all inclusive. It has both length, breadth, height, and depth. Is without beginning and is without end. From Cayce reading 364-10. If we wish to form a vivid picture of a non-spatial being of the fourth dimension, we should do well to take thought as a being for our model. Jung, 1933, page 213. In this way, the three-dimensional world can be interpreted as a projection of the fourth dimension. The principle here is that something projected takes on a lesser dimension. For example, in spatial dimensions, if we shine a flashlight on a basketball in such a way that the shadow of the ball appears on the wall, the darkened circle we see is a two-dimensional projection of the three-dimensional ball. In a similar manner, what we perceive in our three-dimensional world can be understood as a projection of the fourth dimension, the realm of thoughts or ideas. From this point of view, we can say that consciousness as we know it is a past condition. That is, what we see as our material world is the result of mental processes that took place before that time. In Govinda's words, what appears as form does thus belong essentially to the past and is therefore felt as alien by those who have developed spiritually beyond it. Govinda, 1969, page 69. What we experience now as reality is, in actuality, the manifestation of what we have built previously. As with an architect's blueprints, once the blueprint has been drawn, we know what the building will look like when it manifests. It is only a matter of transforming it from its idea level into physical manifestation. We can go back and modify our thought patterns, modify the blueprints, but unless we do, the nature of the manifestation is fixed. Fourth dimensional reality, therefore, is at the creating level. Something that manifests in the three-dimensional world is already a past condition, relatively speaking. Govinda summarizes this concept with this principle. Materialization can be influenced, directed, and modified only while it is still in the process of formation. Govinda, 1969, page 215. Point 5. Every individual has will by which to choose how to use the patterning qualities of the mind. Attaining the infinite in the finite requires the use of the will. We must choose to operate under the direction of the infinite aspect of our being as opposed to our limited aspects. No other influence is stronger than the will. To be born as a human being is a privilege according to the Buddha's teaching because it offers the rare opportunity of liberation through one's own decisive effort, through a turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. Govinda, 1969, page 124. Question: are hereditary, environment, and will equal factors in aiding or retarding the entity's development? Answer: will is the greater factor, for it may overcome any or all of the others, provided that will is made one with the pattern C. For no influence of heredity, environment, or whatnot surpasses the will. Cayce reading 5749-14. For the will of each entity, of each soul, is that which individualizes it, that makes it aware of itself. Cayce reading 853-9. As to what an entity does concerning its environs, or hereditary influence from the material viewpoint, this is governed by the action of the will. that active principle making for the individuality of an entity from those atomic forces that may manifest in a material plane or in any sphere of material or matter existence. Thus is man endowed with the individual soul. Hence the will is an attribute of the soul and the whole development of an entity. Cayce reading 274-1. Point 6. Enlightenment comes from the integration of the various aspects of our being. We must understand that form and spirit are equally important to our purpose for being in the earth. The rejection of the body cannot lead to the attainment of the infinite in the finite. Those who only suppress their sense activities and natural functions of life before they even have tried to make the right use of them will not become saints, but merely petrifacts, made of stone, in other words. A saintliness which is built merely on negative virtues, merely on avoidance and escape, may impress the crowd and may be taken as proof of self-control and spiritual strength. However, it will lead only to spiritual self-annihilation, but not to enlightenment. Govinda, 1969, page 273. We have been addressing the question of who we are as human beings, or, putting it another way, what is the nature of being human? The answer was given in these 6 points. 1. All life, indeed all that exists, is a manifestation of the one creative energy, which is God. 2. Every individual is a spiritual being, yet is not aware of the totality of that being. 3. Any time the one energy is expressed in the physical world, it will have form patterned by the mind. 4. The patterning activities of the mind can be understood as being fourth dimensional. 5. Every individual has will by which to choose how to use the patterning qualities of the mind. And 6. Enlightenment comes from the integration of the various aspects of our being. All this may seem to be far from the concerns of meditation. Quite the contrary, meditation is a critical skill for each of us if we are to come to grips with who we are collectively, and especially if we are seeking to discover ourselves individually. The next chapter connects the concepts of meditation with the concepts of our humanness, our presence in this world, our reasons for being. That's the end of part 2, Understanding Meditation, chapter 6, Who Are We? There's a lot in that.
Yes, that was very good.
I love the way it's all the readings and the work by Govinda.
Lama Govinda, yeah.
Yeah, I do, but I haven't read anything, and it's great the way it's all sort of summarised and put together. Wonderful.
Yeah.
It is a very well put together book.
I like
Probably would be good to learn more about what Lama Govinda. Let's just say Lama Govinda, what he's saying there. I don't fully understand all the terminology, but it's sort of probably a start to get to know what they're thinking. Yeah.
It just feels like another way of.
Yeah.
Sorry, am I speaking over you? Did you finish, Liz?
Yep.
I feel as though it's just another way of saying the same thing. That's how it's coming to me, that it's all the same wisdom, just said in different words. But
yeah, that's I think that's the point.
Yeah, I like the patterning part, where we use the mind to pattern whatever we want. because we don't see it when you see a human being, but there must be a lot of stuff going on in the head, and you don't see it unless you live with that person. Then you start to see a lot of things or notice,
Mm.
Yes, and they probably notice a lot in us.
I really like the analogy of an architect's blueprints.
Yes.
So, quite often you'll be talking with someone about something in the family, your spouse or something, and eventually you'll manifest it. But it was first an idea that you discussed and then it manifested. So, yeah, we've all got those blueprints running around in our heads, and eventually they take form.
Yeah. I think it was said in that part, but I wrote it down somewhere from one of the readings. Will is the choosing function of the mind. It's like the choosing, which is that what just came out in that?
Well, not necessarily, because will is an attribute of the soul, whereas the mind is the mediator between basically the soul and the body. And in the readings, you'll find quite often Cayce said that the mind and the will are quite often at loggerheads and are fighting each other. And that's why we need to get everything to work together in peace and harmony. And not have parts of ourselves at loggerheads and trying to be the boss.
But making that final decision involves the will. When you decide, okay, this is where I'm going, or this is where I'm heading, then the will is.
Kevin Tedeschi, in one of his books, was warning about making sure that you don't think that it's the soul's will that you're using when making those choices, because quite often it's an aspect of the will that is purely subconscious, and you're choosing from habit patterns, which are not the highest form of the will. So, yeah, there's a few little tricks that could be played and when you think that you're doing the right thing, but it's actually you're choosing from habitual patterns rather than the soul's actual will, and which is why meditation is so important, to get in touch with that true nature of the will.
I think that's why, when we go back to the previous lessons, remember that guidance that helped us to make the right decision in the end. There was quite a few. You had to go a big process involved.
Yeah,
that's right. Decision-making process. Yeah.
Because unfortunately, so many of the decisions we make are based on habit patterns.
And then you ask yourself, why is life happening? Why am I in this state?
Yeah. It's wonderful to know that this reality that we're in is the past. That's what it kept saying, that it's not, all the things that have really happened in the present time happened at a different level of consciousness to our three-dimensional level of awareness, which is really just a reflection of what's happened previously in our minds and is now reflected back to us as a reality that is a past condition. And we can't change it. All we can do is change things at the level of the mind before we set it in concrete in the three-dimensional world. Once again, that's why, as they stressed at the end of that bit there, meditation is so important, to become attuned to that deeper level where we can make the right choices.
Yes, it develops our listening capacities, doesn't it? Like our inner listening capacities, I think.
And it develops other things like our awareness of remembering our dreams. That goes hand in hand with meditation. And the dreams are coming from a deeper level of consciousness to try and integrate us. Fortunately, they don't chastise us too much, but they're just trying to nudge us in the right direction.
Okay, so chapter 7 from Inner Power of Silence, part 2 is what role meditation plays in who we are. The pattern to be awakened. In the preceding chapter, we saw how we impart form qualities or patterns to the one energy with our mind. That form or vibrational pattern created by the mind at the fourth dimensional level can hinder or aid greater self-awareness depending on its nature. This suggests we must be wise in our choice of pattern to create. Therefore, we must identify those patterns most conducive to achieving the integrated self we seek for enlightenment. At the fourth dimensional level, we have access to every thought we have ever created. In addition, we have access to patterns that are shared or common to all humankind. These impersonal or archetypal patterns manifest in the dreams and the myths of all cultures. Differentiating between patterns that have been individually created based upon our own unique experiences or choices, and those patterns which are available to all, Jung writes, a more or less superficial layer of the unconscious is undoubtedly personal. I call it the personal unconscious, but this personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer which does not derive from personal experience and is not a personal acquisition, but is inborn. This deeper layer I call the collective unconscious. I've chosen the term collective because this part of the unconscious is not individual, but universal. In contrast to the personal psyche, it has contents and modes of behavior that are more or less the same everywhere and in all individuals. It is, in other words, identical in all men and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of a suprapersonal nature, which is present in every one of us. The contents of the collective unconscious are known as archetypes. In his investigation of symbology, Govinda comes to a similar conclusion. While mantric symbols have their origin within the cultural realm of a certain language or civilization, there are other symbols of figurative and conceptual nature, the origin of which cannot be traced to any particular place, tribe, or race, and which are not bound to any particular period of human civilization or to any religion, but which are the common property of humanity. These symbols may disappear in one place. In fact, they may be buried for centuries, only to reappear at another place and to rise resurrected in a new and more brilliant garb. They may change their names and even their meaning according to the emphasis laid upon the one or other of their aspects without losing their original direction. Because it is in the nature of a symbol to be as manifold as the life from which it grew, and yet to retain its character, its organic unity within the diversity of its aspects. One of these archetypal patterns within the unconscious is consistent with an integrated state of being, the goal toward which we strive, in which the infinite expresses through the finite. Diverse elements of consciousness are drawn together in this pattern: heart and head, feeling and intellect, highest love and deepest knowledge. This highest archetype is within each of us, not only in the sense that we can experience it visually as in a dream, but in terms of the functioning of the entire body in a healed and integrated fashion. The Cayce readings refer to the following qualities of this pattern and its expression: relevant to human experience, available to every individual, service, seeing God in every expression, obedient to the inner law, humour, compassion for others, living in the present, forgiveness, patience, humility, and the emphasis upon the importance of the spirit in which one acts. The activity of this pattern in one's life is initiated as one manifests these qualities. Jung calls this pattern the Christ archetype. He argues that the rapid spread of Christianity is evidence to support his notion that the Christ is an element of the collective unconscious and hence available to all. Christ would never have made the impression he did on his followers if he had not expressed something that was alive and at work in their unconscious. Christianity itself would never have spread through the pagan world with such astonishing rapidity had its ideas not found an analogous psychic readiness to receive them. It is this fact which also makes it possible to say that whoever believes in Christ is not only contained in him, but that Christ then dwells in the believer as the perfect man formed in the image of God. The Cayce readings refer to it as the Christ consciousness. The following reading is a concise description of our relationship to that pattern, including the important reference to the will. The Christ consciousness will remain a latent potential within the unconscious unless an individual exercises his will to choose it. The question was asked, should the Christ consciousness be described as the awareness within each soul, imprinted in pattern on the mind, and waiting to be awakened by the will of the soul's oneness with God? Answer, correct. That's the idea exactly. From the Cayce reading 5749-14. The secret of the golden flower describes this pattern within us as something that existed before the creation of the world. Within our 6-foot body, we must strive for the form which existed before the laying down of heaven and earth. From Wilhelm. Govinda points out that the movement of this pattern from a latent force to an active force transforms our concept of reality. Bodhicitta is here the spark of that deeper consciousness, which in the process of enlightenment is converted from a latent into an active, all-penetrating and radiating force. Before this awakening has taken place, our existence is a senseless running about in circles, and since we cannot find any meaning within ourselves, the world around us appears equally meaningless. Now that we are aware of the latent pattern within us, we can define enlightenment, as just referred to by Govinda, as the process of awakening that pattern and through will, keeping it at the center of our being. Meditation is the primary technique for facilitating that process. The process of enlightenment. Sources comparing approaches to meditation describe many processes from which a meditator can choose. Narano describes 3 basic approaches. The 3 types of meditation may be represented as the 3 points of a triangle. At one end of the baseline is represented meditation upon externally given symbolic objects. And at the other end is the contrasting alternative of meditation upon spontaneously arising contents of the mind. In the former approach, the individual attempts to interiorize an externally given form or projects his experience onto it until his subjectivity is absorbed by the object. In the latter, the individual seeks attunement to an inner form or a formless depth out of which a personal form emerges in imagery, thoughts, gestures, feelings, or above all, as an attitude toward the situation at the moment. In contrast with these two orientations in the task of meditation, one outer directed and the other inner directed, the third point in our triangle stands for a pure negative approach, not reaching out or a reaching in, but a self-emptying. In this approach, the effort is to attain a stillness of the mind's conceptualizing activity. Seen in the light of teachings from other sources, we can conclude that a meditator will use more than one of these approaches. An individual may move from one approach to another over the course of many years of experience. Example, learning concentration on an external symbol before moving to symbols that arise from within. Or the meditator may move from one approach to another within a single meditation period. Example, focusing on an externally given object initially, and then moving into the total stillness of mind that characterizes the negative way. Otto distinguishes between two pathways, the mysticism of introspection and the mysticism of unifying vision. The teaching of the former is the secret way leads inward, a withdrawal from all outward things, retreat into the ground of one's own being, and the possibility of turning in upon oneself. The teaching of the latter is the unifying vision as opposed to the multiplicity of the object. It has no need for a doctrine of the soul, but sees all being in terms of its fundamental oneness. Otto points out that these two ways can be combined in the searchings of one individual, quoting Plotinus. Both types of mysticism intermingle. The first is clearly expressed by him in a passage of the Sixth Ennead. Often when I awake from the slumber of the body and come to myself and step out of the outward world in order to turn in upon myself, I believe unshakably that I belong to a better world. Most glorious life works strongly in me, and I am become one with the Godhead. But compare this passage with the following extract from the Fifth Ennead. They see all not in process of becoming, but in being, and they see themselves in the other. Each being contains within itself the whole intelligible world. Therefore, all is everywhere. Each is their all, and all is each. Man, as he ceases to be an individual, he raises himself again and penetrates the whole world. Then, become one with the all, he creates the all. Many sources agree that the pathway to enlightenment is not just an ascension to states of awareness, such as Otto describes above, or as Govinda described earlier, but must include a descent into the dark side of oneself, so that this element of one's being may be included in any final integration. Narano describes the journey of self-exploration represented in Dante's wanderings through hell as contemplation, not directed to symbolic embodiments of the spiritual goal. In such a process, one is merely an impartial observer of this aspect of oneself without judgment as to what is good. Such a process leads to reevaluation, a new perspective of one's true nature. Some approaches use symbolic forms to awaken the inhabitants of the dark side of the self and assume that undesirable and destructive drives within us are merely imbalanced conditions of something that is essentially good. Narano concludes that the archetypal images used to personify and call up these forces serve as models to direct them to their proper channels. Such images are lacking in Western culture, which has generally been incapable of seeing God in madness and chaos. European Christianity has been primarily ascetic and has attempted to reach God by transcending nature. The mystery religions and certain Greek figures, such as Dionysus and Persephone, are some of the rare examples of the pathway of descent in Western history. Any discussion of the meditation process, be it the way of ascent or descent, must be concerned more with inner experience than with the technique that accompanies the experience. Although the emphasis of our times is on technique, the how-tos, far more important to the process of meditation is the way in which it is used. Sincerity and devotion are the greatest tools of the meditator in the search to know the God forces within, as well as those of the universe beyond. Common to all schools of meditation is a definition of what takes place in meditation: the transformation of one's sense of identity. That process of transformation is described in different terms by the Buddhist, the Taoist, and the Christian. Yet important parallels between these teachings emerge. As you review these ideas from diverse sources, you will see the foundations for the universal approach to meditation described in Chapter 3. Tibetan Buddhism and meditation. Govinda's approach to meditation is based upon the process symbolized by the great mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. These 4 seed syllables represent the states of progress towards enlightenment. Om is the experience of the infinite within us. In the experience of Om, man opens himself, goes beyond himself, liberates himself by breaking through the narrow confines of egohood or self-imposed limitation, and thus he becomes one with the all, with the infinite. If he would remain in this state, there would be an end of his existence as an individual, as a living, thinking, and experiencing being. From Govinda. Om is not the ultimate in the mantric system of Buddhism, as it is in some religions, but it stands at the beginning and is the fundamental experience for whoever seeks enlightenment. Mani is the precious jewel within the mind of the individual, the goal of the alchemists, the symbol of the highest within man's mind. It may be compared to the Christ pattern or archetype latent within each of us. That jewel within the mind can express itself as form and as creative vision. Padme comes from the Sanskrit word for lotus, Padma, and involves the unfoldment of the latent spiritual consciousness in form. This lotus represents the unfoldment of the perfect mind, or the ideal Buddhahood, in which the qualities of enlightenment or of the Buddha, which are the Siddhartha's aim, are differentiated in visible form. Hum is the realization of the consciousness of the infinite in the finite. It is the penetration of the Om into the form that has been created. Om is the ascent towards universality. Hum, the descent of the state of universality into the depth of the human heart. Hum cannot be without Om, but Hum is more than Om. It is the middle way which neither gets lost in the finite nor in the infinite, which is neither attached to the one nor to the other extreme. Therefore it is said, in darkness are they who worship only the world, but in greater darkness they who worship the infinite alone. He who accepts both saves himself from death by the knowledge of the former and attains immortality by the knowledge of the latter. From Govinda. Govinda warns that meditation upon this mantra and the process that it embodies is not an analytical procedure, for that would serve only to entrap us further in an illusory concept of ourselves. Meditation, through which we try to free ourselves from the empirical world by analytical methods of contemplation and intellectual dissection, gets us more and more involved in it, because instead of reversing the direction of our mind, we concentrate our whole attention upon the phenomena of this world, thus strengthening our own illusory conceptions of it. From Govinda. The proper use of this mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, can awaken higher dimensions of awareness. Govinda recognizes that the state of consciousness in which one begins this process of enlightenment is threatened by the idea of higher dimensions of awareness taking over. The limited self fears annihilation and will come up with many excuses and distractions to protect itself and delay the changes of the meditative process. But such a fear is based on a misunderstanding of that process. Thus, the consciousness of a higher dimension consists in the coordinated and simultaneous perception of several directions of movement in a wider, more comprehensive unity without destroying the individual characteristics of the integrated lower dimensions. The reality of a lower dimension is therefore not annihilated by a higher one, but only relativized or put into another perspective of values. The Lord's Prayer and Meditation. The same process, that fourfold progression symbolized in the great mantra, is represented in the Lord's Prayer of the Christian Bible. A movement into the oneness of all being. B, the awareness of the pattern or seed of that oneness within the individual mind. C, the open and receptive form established. And D, the penetration of the infinite into the finite. Our Father who art in heaven recognizes the oneness of the Godhead or the infinite. Hallowed be thy name refers to the Christ and that indwelling pattern. The Christ is associated with the Word, as in St. John's, the Word became flesh. Thy kingdom come expresses that openness and receptivity. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven calls for the manifestation of the divine will in the material world. This remarkable parallel between the Buddhist mantric tradition and the prayer which is at the heart of Christianity raises the possibility that this four-stage progression describes a process that is fundamental to the psyche of the human being and is more than just one culture's approach to enlightenment. The secret of the golden flower and meditation. Two unique phrases are used in this Taoist text to refer to the process of meditation. The circulation of the light refers to the movement of energy along the Kundalini pathway. And yet it is more than just the movement of energy, because the possibility of circulation without light is raised. To clarify this, consider the statement in the text, the light is contemplation. This suggests that the energy awakened as the body becomes still attains the qualities of the light as the mind focuses upon or contemplates the spiritual ideal. The details of the process involved in the circulation of the light are found in the following passage. Of particular interest is the meeting in the abdomen of the spirit with the rising Kundalini. This closely parallels material in the Stanford readings to be considered in the next chapter, which describes a hormonal cell from the pineal to awaken the energy at the cells of Leydig. If one wants to maintain the primal spirit, one must, without fail, first subjugate the perceiving spirit. The way to subjugate it is through the circulation of the light. If one practices the circulation of the light, one must forget both body and heart. The heart must die, the spirit live. When the spirit lives, the breath will begin to circulate in a wonderful way. This is what the Master called the very best. Then the spirit must be allowed to dive down into the abdomen, solar plexus. The energy then has intercourse with spirit, and spirit unites with the energy and crystallizes itself. This is the method of starting the work. From Wilhelm. A second unique phrase in this text is fixating contemplation. Fixation relates to the process of crystallizing or giving form, even in the physical body, to a pattern held by the mind. The text says that the light or the ideal is easy to move but difficult to fix. If it is allowed to circulate for a long enough time, fixation can take place. The text at one point mentions 15 minutes as a minimum length of time for meditation. This may be the time required to overcome the difficulty of fixation. These teachings go on with an often quoted esoteric passage that describes the process of focusing on the ideal, contemplation, and of the distractions that may arise. Fixating contemplation is indispensable. It ensures the making fast of the enlightenment. Only one must not stay sitting rigidly if worldly thoughts come up, but one must examine where the thought is, where it began and where it fades out. When the flight of the thoughts keeps extending further, one should stop and begin contemplating. Let one contemplate and then start fixating again. That is the double method of making fast the enlightenment. It means the circulation of the light. In the earlier discussions of meditation techniques, the use of an affirmation was defined as focusing on a representation of the ideal. If we substitute this term for the word contemplation and make other substitutions based upon relationships already described, the above passage may be written more meaningfully as follows. Meditation is invaluable to spiritual growth. It ensures that enlightenment will not be just a fleeting or transitory experience, but don't become tense or frustrated if thoughts about daily life arise. Examine the thought and accept it. See where it began and where it fades out. If you catch yourself letting a train of worldly thoughts carry you further and further, stop and go back to the affirmation. Say the affirmation again, and then let it once more begin to be built or crystallized within you. That is the double method of making the enlightenment permanent. It means the movement of the one creative energy throughout your being. Russell's study of Taoism and meditation. This material presents a four-part developmental progression that has many similarities to the stages symbolized in the great mantra and the Lord's Prayer. The first stage is the experience of the other pole. Tibetan Buddhism refers to the pole of the infinite as opposed to the limited ego sense of self. Russell describes the first stage as the experience of the unconscious pole through the circulation of the light. The first thing the novice must experience is the existence in the unconscious of an opposite center in which he immerses himself on the one hand, and which, on the other hand, he raises up into consciousness. This stage is called the circulation of the light, or to borrow a Buddhist expression, the wheel of Dharma, which must be turned. Once the opposite pole has been experienced, the second stage involves entering the path of transformation. Just as the mani involves the awareness of the jewel or highest pattern within the individual's mind, Russell describes this stage as the awakening of the seed of the new immortal man. The novice who has reached the meditative experience of the third eye is indeed filled with an ecstatic sense of illumination and awakening. But at present, we are still in the first stage of meditation. The old Adam must die, the immortal man remains to be conceived and born. Still deeper forces are now evoked and called to consciousness, and the path of transformation is undertaken. The second stage is characterized by the practice of the backward flowing motion in meditation. Energy is not permitted to disperse or flow outward through the activities of the lower centers. Instead, the energy is directed back inward and then upward along the Kundalini pathway. In man, logos and eros, cognition and emotion, heart and kidneys are the great contradictory principles equivalent to fire and water. The natural man allows both principles to flow out of him as thinking and begetting. But we must now gather them in so that consciousness and the force of immortality may fructify one another. This turning back of energy, this temporary asceticism, is termed the backward flowing movement, or it is described in the verse, the river of heaven, the Milky Way is flowing upstream. The Padme is associated with the creative image and form. Russell's third stage shows a particularly close resemblance to this part of the mantra, even referring to the lotus. The embryo is pressing to be born. Our immortal essence assumes the imaginary form of a pure eternus, which is eternal child in Latin, rises up, bursts through the skull in the region of the third eye, and with a shout that is echoed by the heavens is born. The reborn man sits immortal on the lotus throne over our head. Like the Buddhist hum, the fourth stage of Taoist meditation is enlightenment, as the infinite manifests in the finite. Having united in himself the polarities of his being, man has become the universe. The whole world is contained in one grain. Evelyn Underhill and meditation. In her study of mysticism, Underhill describes the process leading to enlightenment. This process is demonstrated in the practice of introversion through its 3 stages. Stage 1, recollection, is the first stage, and is mentioned in chapter 3, is the most difficult stage, involving as it does an act of will to go against the habits and impulses of the mind. Stage 2, the second stage is the experience of quiet, a level of experience for which human speech has few equivalents, characterized by an immense increase in the receptivity of the self and by an almost complete suspension of the reflective powers. In this stage, the struggle to concentrate is replaced by a self-acting recollection. Many initially find this stage startling because of the absence of all accustomed mental workings. The quiet is potentially the most misleading to the spiritual seeker because its alert stillness can turn up the limp passivity that characterized the movement called quietism. This group has taken the peace and regeneration of this state to be the goal. mystics who have understood that the quiet is not an end in itself have also been the target of accusations that have been directed at the quietists. Quiet is the danger zone of introversion. Of all forms of mystical activity, perhaps this has been the most abused, the least understood. Its theory, seized upon, divorced from its context and developed to excess, produced the foolish and dangerous exaggerations of quietism. And these, in their turn, caused a wholesale condemnation of the principle of passivity and made many superficial persons regard naked horizon, which means plea or prayer, as an essentially heretical act. The accusation of quietism has been hurled at mystics whose only fault was a looseness of language which laid them open to misapprehension. Underhill describes quietism as absorption in nothing at all, with the purpose to luxuriate in its peaceful effects. She mentions the transcendentalists as examples of this movement, leading to the possible conclusion that transcendental meditation, as taught in this country but introduced long after Underhill's book was published, may lead its followers into the temptation and potential entrapment of this second stage. Much of the teaching of modern mystical cults is thus crudely quietistic. It insists on the necessity of going into the silence, and even with a strange temerity gives preparatory lessons in subconscious meditation, a proceeding which might well provoke the laughter of the saints. The faithful being gathered together are taught by simple exercises in recollection the way to attain the quiet. By this mental trick, the modern transcendentalist naturally attains to a state of vacant placidity in which he rests, and remaining in a distracted idleness and misspending the time in expectation of extraordinary visits, believes with a faith which many of the orthodox might envy that he is here united with his principle. Contrast this with the understanding that the quiet is a stage of preparation. It is only an opening of the door, and that which comes in when the door is opened will be that which we truly and passionately desire. 3, in the third stage, which Underhill called contemplation, the self transcends the stillness of quiet and is energized enthusiastically on those high levels which are dark to the intellect but radiant to the heart. The greatest contemplatives have been able to sustain this third state for only the briefest of moments. Underhill defines 2 conditions present in this experience. Whatever terms he may employ to describe it, and however faint or confused his perceptions may be, the mystic's experience in contemplation is the experience of the all, and this experience seems to him to be given rather than attained. This revealed reality is apprehended by way of participation, not by way of observation. The passive receptivity of the quiet is here developed into an active, outgoing self-donation, which is the self's response to the divine initiative. In this chapter, we have identified an archetypal pattern to which we aspire in our journey toward enlightenment. We have also pointed out the remarkable parallels between diverse Eastern and Western traditions in how meditation provides the essential vehicle for making that spiritual journey and achieving the realization of who we really are. In the next chapter, we will look at the physical side of meditation, what happens in our bodies when we meditate. And that's the conclusion of meditation in who we are.
Well, thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
I think I'll have to have another reread of all of that.
Yeah, yeah,
So much in there.
it was, a lot there.
One bit that I thought was interesting, that it's not so great to focus on the outer world, but if you're only focused on the inner world, the spirit world, that's worse if that's all you're focused on. The important thing is to integrate the two. That was an interesting statement, that focusing purely on the spirit is a worse failing than just focusing on the physical.
Do you think that's reflected in Cayce? Would you say that Cayce sort of something to that?
I don't remember him ever saying, he would definitely say integrate the two. I don't remember ever reading that he was saying that if you just get focused on the spiritual life to the exclusion of trying to integrate it into the physical, that's worse than just being focused on the physical.
I think Cayce has a tremendous emphasis on bringing the spiritual into our physical world, our material world. I think that there is that. Yeah, I'm sort of finding it quite interesting to read about, the Tibetan Buddhism and the Chinese Taoism, and how it contrasts and is similar to the Cayce spirituality. You can see a lot of similarities there. So it makes an interesting learning.
I remember seeing previously this Om Mani Padme Hum being paralleled with the first 4 lines of the Lord's Prayer. I've seen writings from Mark Thurston before about that, but I'm still trying to get my head around the exact interpretation of the Om Mani Padme Hum.
Yeah, interesting.
I like the Lord's Prayer, how it broke it up into 4. Now I have a better understanding of the Lord's Prayer. Those 4 sections, because we just say it, but we didn't realize it has a purpose. Those 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's good.
Also about the Christ as well. Found it interesting.
Yeah.
Collection of many, how do you say it? Patterns, yeah. Many patterns that we can use.
Yeah, the pattern. Yeah. That's really good. That's something I'm gradually getting more understanding of, the pattern of consciousness, of Christ consciousness. Yeah.
So it's a collection of patterns that we need to apply in our life.
And that will awaken the Christ consciousness. The more you apply those patterns of patience and oneness and forgiveness, and I think there's 12 patterns that are listed there. And they're probably represented by the 12 disciples.
Yeah, that was an interesting grouping of the patterns, those elements that constitute Christ consciousness, including humour and compassion and service and so on. That was good.
Humour. Yep.
Okay. Well, 1 more to go.
This has been a long, I think these chapters are a lot longer than what we normally subdivide it up into.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one was fairly long. Yours wasn't quite so long, but this third one is shorter than my one.
Longer than what I'm used to, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll get.
They're kind of a bit academic in a way.
What's that?
Yeah.
What's that, Liz?
I was just saying they're a bit sort of academic or theoretical.
Yeah.
Very sort of wordy.
Yeah. But that shows that he's done a lot of research on all the different ideas and books, different types of meditation, which I don't think I'm going to venture into all those different areas. I'll stick to just the Christian. maybe in another lifetime.
Oh,
Maybe there. Yep,
it was very academic towards the end there.
it was. It was.
Oh,
The light. Did you get all that about the light? The light of consciousness. You know what? They're talking about, like, basically an energetic feeling, but it's just as very wordy to describe it. Yeah. It's like combining energy with consciousness of the ideal of Christ consciousness. So that's, in fact, what it was all about. You know, it was going on and on, but it was sort of really all about that. Oh.
Well, if you have one moment of transcendental consciousness, you just can't put it into words what that experience felt like. Just one moment.
Yeah, I remember, I think one reading where Edgar Cayce said that God is very much in the physical world as in the spiritual world. So, you know, it's not just all spiritual.
Oh, God manifests through us just as much as we're trying to manifest God through us. God is part of that being manifested through us.
Okay. Yeah. So the inner power of silence. So I'll be talking about chapter 8, what happens in our bodies when we meditate. So for hundreds of years, theology, philosophy, and psychology have been concerned about the nature of any connection between the infinite and the finite. If there is a soul with its attributes of the infinite, how is it able to affect the finite physical man? Several of our comparative sources suggest that the spiritual centers within the body provide a partial answer to this question. These centers, called chakras in Eastern writings, are often associated with 7 endocrine glands and the energy fields related to each. Although there may be slight differences among various traditions concerning which endocrine glands are involved, Cayce and Stanford both use this configuration. Gonads, cells of Leydig, adrenals, thymus, thyroid, pineal, and pituitary. So see figure 3. Many psychics have described vortices of energy invisible to most individuals, which touch at points in the physical body corresponding to the 7 endocrine glands. One might compare this to magnetized iron that has a measurable energy field surrounding it. What we see is the iron, but the invisible energy pattern is essential to an understanding of the iron's properties. So you can see this, I think this is a north and south magnet. And the only way you could see it is to put small filings. Then you can see the energy pattern of that magnetized iron. Yeah. So the quality of these chakras, sometimes spelled CAKRAS, as contact points is described by Govinda. In other words, these chakras are the points in which psychic forces and bodily functions merge into each other or penetrate each other. They are the focal points in which cosmic and psychic energies crystallize into bodily qualities, and in which bodily qualities are dissolved or transmuted again into psychic forces. The seat of the soul is where the inner and outer world meet. When they penetrate each other, it is present in every point of penetration. We therefore can say that each psychic center in which we become conscious of this spiritual penetration becomes the seat of the soul, and that by activating or awakening the activities of the various centers, we spiritualize and transform our body. In meditation, these centers may become more integrated with one another and more attuned to the Christ consciousness pattern. The secret of the golden flower refers to this process by saying the seed blossoms of the human body must be concentrated upward in the empty space. This integration and attunement manifests in the physical as a change in the actual chemical activity of the body. In one research study, for example, meditators showed a significant decrease in the concentration of blood lactate, which has been correlated with the presence of anxiety. A word for the function of these spiritual centers is transducer, defined as a device activated by power from one system and supplying power in another form to a second system. For the spiritual centers, the two systems referred to are the soul, with its access to the infinite supply of energy, and the energy we perceive as the physical man. Although no analogy is exact, the spiritual centers function somewhat like valves in that they regulate the flow of the one creative life force into the physical body. Our work on earth is to integrate the activities of these centers. When we achieve this integration of energy fields, they are capable of transducing a higher vibrational energy that can manifest as healing in ourselves and others. In contrast, imbalance among these centers is likely to result in imbalanced experiences for an individual. Activity at one of these spiritual contact points is sometimes referred to as opening a center. To open these centers means to lessen the barrier between the finite and the infinite aspects of oneself, a goal of the spiritual seeker. The question is how to go about doing it. The Cayce readings answer that question in information given to individuals studying the Revelation of John. These readings suggest that this New Testament book is a description of meditation experiences and that the 7 churches of Asia correspond to the 7 spiritual centers of the body. At one point in the Revelation, John sees a book with 7 seals on it. The Cayce source interprets the book as the body and the 7 seals as those 7 centers within the body. So Cayce reading 281-29. John cries out because he knows that no one in heaven or earth is worthy to open those seals. However, at that moment, the Christ appears, the Lamb, and opens them. This symbology suggests an answer to most questions about the use of drugs, chants, or any technique that tries to manipulate the activities of these centers. The only force that should open them is the Spirit of the Christ within. The natural response of the spiritual centers is to open as one seeks to apply the qualities of the Christ consciousness in one's daily life. As has been experienced, this opening of the centers or the raising of the life force may be brought about by certain characters of breathing. For as indicated, the breath is the power in itself, and this power may be directed to certain portions of the body. But for what purpose? As yet, it has been only to see what will happen. So that's Cayce reading 2475-1. The Cayce readings go on to say that the opening of the spiritual centers can be directly related to the proper use of the Lord's Prayer. So the question, does the outline of the Lord's Prayer have any bearing on the opening of the centers? The answer here is indicated the manner, the purpose for which it was given. The implication is that Jesus' purpose as he gave this prayer was to awaken an integrated activity of the spiritual centers. By stilling the mind and focusing the attention on the inner response to the words of the prayer, we begin to attune ourselves to the Christ archetype. Before considering the individual characteristics of each of the 7 spiritual centers, note 3 concepts found in the sources used for this book, which deal with the physiology of meditation. And all of the endocrine centers relate to one another. Research in endocrinology provides extensive information describing how the ductless glands affect each other. Considering meditation, this means we cannot describe accurately the activities of any one center in an individual without information concerning the activities of the other centers in that particular body. 2, in meditation, the centers are awakened in a sequential order. That order is physically from the lowest in the body to the highest, except in the case of the pituitary, which is awakened last, although located slightly lower than the pineal. This sequential awakening is described as a movement of energy and is often referred to as the Kundalini pathway. Sources dealing with the Taoist approach refer to it as the circulation of the light. The word circulation refers to the notion that this energy moves back down through the lower centers after having reached the pituitary. Only after reaching this highest center in the body does the energy attain the vibrational quality that can fulfill its potential to heal and to attune the activities of the centers to the Christ archetype. The centers can be grouped into 3 sections. The lower 3, the gonads, cells of Leydig, and adrenals. The middle or heart center, the thymus, and the upper 3, the thyroid, pineal, and pituitary. Such a division appears in many schools of meditation and puts particular emphasis on the heart center as the mediator between the upper and the lower groups. Examples of this grouping are found in Govinda and Roselle. According to Tibetan tradition, the centers are divided into 3 zones, an upper one, to which the centers of the brain and of the throat belong, a middle one, to which the heart center belongs, and a lower one, to which the solar plexus and the organs of reproduction belong. The upper field is in the middle of the forehead, seat of the radiance of our essential nature, Sing Kuan. The middle field is in the heart, the true source of the Cinnabar red elixir and of the conscious soul, Hun, and the true field is in the middle of the body, approximately from the navel to the kidneys, seat of the vital force, Ming, and of the lower soul, Ho. Stanford's The Spirit Unto the Churches provides perhaps the most extensive description of the qualities and activities of the individual centers. So here are the major points for each center. First one is gonads. The gonads, which is the testes in the male and ovaries in the female, are the transformer and condenser of the one energy as it is expressed in the body. That basic energy is not sexual, although it can be expressed in that way. Freudian psychology is relevant to the extent that we see ourselves merely as physical beings. When we identify with the material, finite nature of our being and ignore the spiritual dimension, the activities of the cells of Leydig, adrenals, and thymus revolve about the gonads, which are often symbolized by the earth. The following passage from Stanford summarizes how the energy of the gonads is drawn upon and used by other centers. When there is the release of this force in a sexual climax, it is released in a relationship more directly to the cells of Leydig, although affecting other centers too. When it is expressed in determination to get something done, or in anger or in fear, particularly fear at the physical plane or defensive fear in the more external sense, it relates to the adrenal center. When it relates to compassion, to love, as in the relationship of oneness, help, and extending out of oneself in a mother to a child, or to the feeling and the sense of well-being, it manifests through the heart or thymus center. However, when the sexual force manifests as speech, as ecstatic speech, speaking in ecstasy or in tongues, as dissertation through the voice, as the use of the voice in various ways, destructively or constructively, it manifests through the will or throat center. When it manifests through the intellect, the brilliance of mind and thought, it operates by a major part through the pineal gland. When in meditation, in the ecstasy of God consciousness and peace and stillness and love in its highest form, this gonadal energy is being directed, manifested through, and returning downward to transform from the pituitary center. Thus the difference should be clear. Govinda's description of the gonadal center makes clear the possibility of aligning or attaining it with the activities of the higher centers, thereby using this energy as an aid to awakening spiritual consciousness. The lowest of these centers, which represent the element earth, is called Muladhara chakra, root support, and is situated at the base of the spinal column. It corresponds to the plexus pelvis in Western physiology and contains the still unqualified primordial vital energy, which serves either the functions of physical reproduction and rejuvenation, or brings about the sublimation of these forces into spiritual potentialities. The latent energy of this center is depicted as the dormant force of the goddess Kundalini, who as the Sakti of Brahma embodies the potentiality of nature, whose effects may be either divine or demoniacal. The wise who control these forces may reach through them the highest spiritual power and perfection, while those who ignorantly release them will be destroyed by them. In Stanford's readings, conscious purposefulness is the transforming element for the activities of the gonads. Through devotion, service, and discernment, the capacity to differentiate between what leads to higher awareness and what does not, the gonads help us move forward in our efforts to achieve awareness of the infinite in the finite. Second one is the cells of Leydig. The cells of Leydig or Leiden are located within the testes or ovaries and within the adrenals. Water is the most frequent symbol for this center. In sexual climax, the cells of Leydig draw upon the gonads, resulting in the movement of energy through this center, but in an outward direction. The energy moving through this center may be perceived incorrectly as a movement upward, such as in meditation. Here then is our temptation. Will we use the energies of our bodies to awaken faculties of higher consciousness, or to express ourselves merely in terms of our physical nature? No other human activity presents such a clear choice as does the sex drive. Will we bring a consciously chosen spiritual ideal into our sexual activity, or will we attend only to the physical sensations of sexual release? This question has been debated for centuries by those seeking higher states of awareness. The cells of Leydig are so closely related to the endocrine processes of sexual expression and to the development of the secondary sex characteristics, for example, voice changes, hair growth patterns. They are usually associated with the concept of temptation in studies of the spiritual centers. And the third one is adrenals. The adrenal center or solar plexus center is referred to as the god of the earth because it is easily awakened by patterns developed within the finite earthly boundaries we perceive as our limits. This center is the distributor of energies in response to the will. So if the will is directed towards a limited identity of ourselves, that is, our physical consciousness, egos, the expressions of this center can include stubbornness, resentment, and anger. Our fight or flight instinct is activated through this center by the release of adrenaline into the bloodstream. The qualities of personality affected by this center, adrenal, as described by Stanford here, as to negative emotions or attitudes expressed that come through the adrenal center, pride in part in one of its aspects, particularly anger, where it hates others, where it makes the mind unconscious of its source, hatred, despise, and jealousy. Jealousy is closely related, of course, to the gonad and Leydig centers, but it manifests more through the adrenal center. For jealousy is a fire that burns within. The expression of these emotions or attitudes in not being conscious of how they make a person operate in body and mind and his or her own consciousness is in itself sinful or destructive once one is conscious of the forces involved. As to positive attitudes, the ability to laugh comes in a great part through the adrenal center. To laugh in the presence of circumstance where it is needed or helpful to the mind. To persist, to continue in the presence of difficulty is also a positive expression of the adrenal. To observe another's weaknesses and not get angry, but rather to uplift another and be willing to help is to bring the influence of the heart center, the air center, and the adrenal, the fire center, into a proper relationship. To manifest strength or purpose of any kind, if the purpose is good, is a positive expression of the adrenal center. The adrenal center is frequently symbolized by a fire or by the lion or any of the great cats. It is often related to psychicism and particularly with mediumship. That is why so many who have the adrenal type of psychicism become mediums. For it is this center that can exude so much astral energy and can feed the unregenerate spirits and the astral bodies of beings that are seeking energy. The adrenal center is particularly receptive to astral influence because it is that center which combines the subtle, the air, into the solid in a fire, and astral fire. Perhaps Stanford's most important point in his description of this center concerns our preoccupation with speed and our lack of interest in turning this energy upward in meditation to awaken a higher state of consciousness. Stanford attributes this to our fear of the responsibility that comes in recognizing our inner spiritual nature. Expressions of speed and power represent the use of energy at an adrenal level that is directed outward instead of upward. Referring to the symbol of the great cat for the adrenals, he cites two advertising slogans popular in the 1970s as characteristic of our culture's over-concern for this center. Put a tiger in your tank and get the tiger's paws for your card. The fourth one is the thymus. The thymus center or heart center is the arbitrator between the lower three centers and the upper three. From the activities of this center, we begin to identify ourselves with the qualities of our spiritual nature as represented in the thyroid, pineal, and pituitary. This change of heart is shaped by the affinities we have with the world around us. Affinity or love, in the broader sense of the word, encompasses every experience we have where we communicate with someone or have a feeling for something outside of ourselves. This love and recognition of the other is always related to the thymus center. The following passage summarizes how the thymus can serve through love to unite the activities of the lower and upper centers. What is seen in the very nature of man in his complexity, the seeming opposites of the spiritual and the physical. We have the God of heavens and the God of earth. We have between them, in a sense, the arbitrator, the thymus. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, through love. Love is that which makes whole or recognizes the wholeness, the oneness of the lower with the higher. Hence, wherever there is love expressed at any level from one person to another, dispersed from a person or within a person, we see an influence upon the thymus. When the thymus fails to operate in such an integrative way, its activities manifest as grief, emotional depression, and self-pity. In its positive function, the thymus helps keep the body free from disease through its influence upon the white blood cells. The thymus center is frequently symbolized by the eagle or another bird or by the air. Because of its location near the lungs, its activity is often depicted in dreams of the wind, tornadoes, objects being thrown through the air, or various aircraft. Reflecting its nature as the mediator, it can also be symbolized by functions requiring balance, such as a tightrope walker or a juggler. Perhaps the most noticeable quality of an individual in whom the thymus is working in an integrative fashion is the absence of fear. Stanford's description points to important relations between this center and the adrenals and the pituitary. Hence, where there comes perfect love, there can be no fear. Why? Fear comes about by an attitude of mind consciousness, but at the physical level, there is immediately that excitation of the adrenal. The heart starts beating faster. How does this relate to the thymus? The very same hormones that stimulate the increased activity of the heart and blood circulation stimulate the thymus at the same time. They will stimulate it in several different ways in its ability to produce parent cells for immunological purposes. In its relationship to changes in the control of cell integrity in the body, in its relationship to the circulatory and the lymphatic systems, and in many other ways, but the same hormones are responsible. However, where the love is perfect, where there is a perfect balance in the thymus, it responds perfectly to the signal from the pituitary. Therefore, by its reaction and its hormones upon the adrenal itself, as well as by the strength of its own impulse, it cannot be fully affected by any, even inadvertent, impulses from the adrenal. So the person cannot fear at the physical level and will not fear. The fifth one is the thyroid. The thyroid center or throat center is most often associated with the human will. This sole faculty is a complex topic and must be seen in a far broader context than merely choice. In fact, much of what we call will-directed choice isn't that at all. Instead, we can see upon honest self-observation that mental patterns, often subconscious, which are linked to one of the four lower centers, often compel us to decisions with little or no real freedom. Will is a part of the Godhead within us and directs us toward the expression of the infinite in the finite. This higher will is not reached by an intellectual process. We cannot determine through logic the will of the Godhead within us. Only through devotion and purposefulness do we become conscious of that higher will being expressed in the finite. As discussed earlier, meditation is not a logical, rational process of the mind. This point rests largely upon understanding the qualities of the thyroid center. The spiritual search is not so much an effort of the earthly forces to reach up and establish a place for themselves among the infinite forces. Recall the story of the Tower of Babel and the confusion at the throat or speech level. Instead, our search is the effort of the infinite forces to descend into a receptive and sincere finite expression. Qualities related to an imbalance in this center include stubbornness and not listening to others. The phrase "a stiff-necked people" refers to activities of this center. Because of the proximity of the throat to those structures which produce speech and sound, the voice can play a role in attunement of this center. The use of chants in devotions are important in attuning the will toward a higher manifestation. The reason for this is that when a chant is used, whether it is that called a mantra or any type chanted for spiritual purposes of devotion, the heart is filled with something other than those things which gratify the bodily consciousness. And there is only one direction from which this can come from above. It is always exerted and controlled by the thyroid, the will center, that in which the word is manifested by seeking devotion, which is an aspect of the heart center, and by using the voice, the throat, musically. The thyroid is most often symbolized by images relating to the throat area, to speech, or to words. For example, the neck, the tongue, a hangman's noose, a book. And the sixth center is the pineal. The pineal center or crown center has often been referred to as the third eye. Although some systems prefer to associate the pituitary center with the third eye, this center is the major influence to the mind and to the intellect in particular. As this center is awakened in us, we have access to all knowledge and to memory of all past experiences. Its activity, especially in meditation, is closely related to the cells of Leydig. The following passage describes that relationship and several factors relating to correctly awakening the energies of the spiritual centers. Of particular importance is the difference between conditions producing emotional or psychic disturbances and conditions producing the integrative meditation experiences. There is a special impulse from the pineal at a physical level, and at the hormonal level that relates especially to the Leydig. There is a special impulse that can come from the pineal in response to consciousness that can cause a rising up of an energy from the gonad forces through the agency of the Leydig. In an ultimate sense, this energy moves through a more central portion of the spine. Normally, it is imbalanced and dispersed into the activities of the world through the two channels upon either side of the spine and the nerves, the Ida and the Pingala, in yogic terminology. However, in the presence of this special impulse, this energy rises and passes as an impulse through the central channels of the spine. It moves upward, reaching the level of the pineal in response to that which first came from above. Now understand this. It is an important point. Many persons inadvertently or by false dedication, seeking psychic phenomena or other things, awakened by certain means and aspect of this gonadal energy through an inadvertent condition of the Leydig, without the calling up from above, from the pineal. When this happens, the energy frequently becomes dispersed at various glandular levels upon the way and may create all manner of emotional or physical disturbances, which are seen as spontaneous manifestations of what could be called emotional, mental, or psychical disturbances. These Stanford readings go on to describe the relationship between the pineal and the cells of Leydig, referring to a hormonal key that awakens the cells of Leydig. The following is perhaps the most important passage in the Stanford readings on meditation. There is the key to the pineal center to unlock the door of the body, and indeed to unlock the door to the kingdom of heaven. See, it depends on which way you are going. Look, some have misinterpreted and said that the pineal is the door. It is not the door. The Leydig is the door. The pineal is the key of the kingdom of heaven and to the kingdom of heaven. The key is sent down at a physical level and a hormone level and a mind level from the pineal to activate the Leydig center in a very certain way. At this point, the Leydig is so stabilized and channeled or opened as the door that the temptation forces, the mind forces, the imaginative forces are still and stabilized by a singular impulse of energy exchange between the lower centers and the higher. Understand, the key is not of this world. It is the key of and to the kingdom of heaven. It can unlock the earth or open it to the heavens. And the final one, the seventh one, the pituitary. The pituitary gland or brow center is the master gland of the body. As this center is awakened, there comes the awareness of the oneness of all being. Its primary quality is service, which Stanford defines as a state of enlightenment when the finite consciousness of man enters the light. Once the energy awakened in meditation reaches the pineal, as described above, it builds up to the point where it passes across to the pituitary, bringing into awareness the qualities of consciousness related to that highest center. Those qualities are divine love, service, and a sense of oneness. The passage of energy from the pineal to the pituitary stimulates the optic nerve and creates the sensation of a blinding light. For some, such as St. Paul, blinding is at least temporarily a literal fact. The secret of the golden flower refers to the pituitary as the heavenly heart. The second passage below makes reference as well as to the earthly heart, which can be interpreted as the thymus center under the influence of the three lower centers. The work on the circulation of the light depends entirely on the backward flowing movement, so that the thoughts, the place of heavenly consciousness, the heavenly heart, are gathered together. The heavenly heart lies between the sun and the moon, that is, between the two eyes. The Book of the Yellow Castle says, in the square inch field of the square foot house, life can be regulated. The square foot house is the face, the square inch field in the face. What could that be other than the heavenly heart? When men are set free from the womb, the primal spirit dwells in the square inch between the eyes, but the conscious spirit dwells below in the heart. This lower fleshly heart has the shape of a large peach. It is covered by the wings of the lungs, supported by the liver, and served by the bowels. This heart is dependent on the outside world. The lower heart moves like a strong, powerful commander who despises the heavenly ruler because of his weakness and has usurped the leadership in affairs of state. But when the primal castle can be fortified and defended, then it is as if a strong and wise ruler sat upon the throne. So the circulation of the light is completed as the energy passes back to the other centers, this time imparting the vibrational qualities taken on by its contact with the pituitary. That vibration can best be described as healing, for it stimulates an integrative functioning of each of the spiritual centers. This is a physiological goal of meditation. According to Govinda, an understanding of the nature of the spiritual centers gives us insight into the nature of the universe. The human being is a microcosmic representation of the macrocosm. The seven centers of the human body represent, in a certain way, the elementary structure and dimensionality of the universe, from the state of greatest density and materiality up to the state of immaterial multidimensional extension, from the organs of dark, subconscious, but cosmically powerful primordial forces to those of a radiant, enlightened consciousness. That the form potentialities of the whole universe are latent in these centers is hinted at by attributing to them all the sounds of the Sanskrit alphabet in the form of seed syllables. What more fitting way to conclude the discussion of the physical side of meditation by seeing ourselves as representations of the universe in miniature. Now that's the end of what happens in our bodies when we meditate.
Thank you, Keith.
Oh, that was a lot.
How are you going, Alison?
Oh, I'm really having trouble concentrating,
I was wondering how you were
staying
going.
awake. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
it's all good though.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well done to you to stuck with it.
Just. And well done to all of you for presenting it and reading it.
Quite difficult to read by yourself.
Yeah.
So much.
There's a lot there, but
Yeah.
it's hard to edit it, to think, oh, what should I sort of throw away, not include. So some of the passages, maybe with more time, you could possibly summarize them or translate them and just sort of, summarize it a bit more. Yeah.
But I've got the book of Stanford, Unto the Churches. It's a good book.
Okay.
Yeah, that Stanford book.
Have you got it in PDF form?
No. I couldn't find it in PDF form. That's why I had to buy it through ebooks. Yeah.
So that's actually really about all the chakras,
Yeah.
because that's what the churches represent. Okay.
It's interesting how the energy flows all through our body and how we control it, or we think we're controlling it, or maybe it's controlling us.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was fascinated to read where jealousy comes from.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Adrenals, yeah.
No, it comes from the cells of Leydig. It might affect the adrenals, but it originates in the cells of Leydig.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this the last of the book, or there's still more?
There is a little bit more. I think there might be like one more session, because there's just another couple of sections of it. Let me see. I don't know if I've got the contents, or I'll go and look at it.
I thought it was a small book, but it's more than it's.
It might have seemed like a small book, but it's not very small. No. I'll just see if I can pick out. There's just probably, I think, two more sections. I think there's a chapter 9, and I think there's an appendix. I'll just see if I can. I'll go right to the end and.
So we have to decide after that what next.
Yeah.
Because this could be the last meditation book. I mean, this is the perfect.
Yeah, there's one appendix about sort of research on meditation.
Is it worth reading?
Yeah.
I had a book in mind, but I don't know if it's well, it's worth.
Yeah. The other one is How East Meets West.
Okay. So that's enough for one session.
Yeah, that's chapter 9, How East Meets West. And then the other one is the appendix, is like scientific research into meditation. So they're the 2 chapters. So, but yeah. And what was the other book you were thinking could be suitable?
Yeah, but just one idea, but it was the Scars of the Soul.
Scars of the Soul, that sounds familiar.
Holistic Healing in the Edgar Cayce readings by Mary Ann Woodward.
We needed to have done that prior to our Edgar Cayce on Healing conference.
Holistic healing, it's to do with karma and the cause. What's the contents? So what is physical karma? What causes physical karma? Examples of physical karma, meeting karma, and then healing the scars.
Can we just do the last section?
Skip to the last one, healing the scars.
I've been rereading Many Mansions.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
Yeah, well, it's very old now, but there's still a lot of really good things in it about karma and a lot of the illnesses and issues that people are facing because of karmic influences.
Yeah, I read that as a teenager. I probably should have another go.
Yeah, look, you'd be fascinated what you find in it now.
Yeah, I probably should pick it up.
Yeah, because you can see the connection between karma, which is all the stuff that you've done in your previous lives, still stored in your soul, and how it affects your body, like it's not lost, and so this 7 spiritual centers, how it affects your 7 spiritual centers and then your physical body. So you're trying to reverse or heal yourself
So that's what that book's about, Keith.
No, it's just, I'm just saying that how the 7 spiritual centers is that meeting point between, you know, our soul and all the memories and our physical body at the moment. That's where all the spiritual stuff happens. It's not lost here.
One thing I was reading about in many mansions was delayed karma. That if you're leading a very ordinary life with doesn't seem to have many karmic obligations being met, it could be that there was no opportunities for karma that's still sitting there waiting to be played out in this lifetime, and it might still be sitting there ready for you in the next lifetime.
Good to know, Russell. Good to know.
Yeah.
The hammer's going to fall, but not this time, in the next one. Great.
But I think if you do a lot of good acts, it clears up a lot of your karma too. So
Well, that's right.
yeah.
Just because there's karmic things sitting there, you might do some good enough things in this lifetime to ameliorate that, or at least invoke the law of grace instead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The law of grace can allow it to be overcome. But
yeah,
I guess your consciousness would need to be changing quite a bit too.
Yeah. So ignorance is bliss. On the conscious level, you know, the soul knows what karma is sitting there waiting, but on the conscious level, we've got no idea.
Thank goodness.
Well, there is still one more, so maybe next do the last chapter 9 and the appendix, so there would only be 2.
Maybe we can I'll forward this book, but everybody suggests a book or whatever, and we all look into it and next meeting and decide which one is. I'll send this copy of this book to have a look at it, and maybe many mentions as well in any other book.
Actually, I've been thinking of many mentions is on my book list. So maybe it is relevant. Maybe it's something we could do.
It's a wonderful book. I haven't looked at it for decades and decades.
Maybe Scars of the Soul might be like a introduction before, because Many Mansion is quite a heavy, complicated one.
Well, I'm sure that what's her name, Marianne Woodward. I'm sure she would have been influenced by Gina Germanara, who written that based on karma, because I think Many Mansions is the go-to book about karma, and because that's where Gina Germanara talks about, you know, boomerang karma and all these different types of karma that we have these things happening to us. And look, I was always concerned as to why something that I did when what my personality was John Smith 3 lifetimes ago, suddenly me as Russell Bowey has these things thrust upon me that I have no idea that, and at the soul level I do, but at the conscious mind level, you can understand why people say, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? Because in my lifetime as Russell Bowey, I may not have done it and deserved it. But 3 lifetimes ago, I probably did, but I've got no awareness of it. So my thought always was, why do we have these things happening that are teaching lessons based on what happened 3 lifetimes ago, that I'm sort of wondering, well, what have I done wrong to have these things happening now? But really, it's not what happens to you, it's how you choose to respond to what happens to you, which is the spirit in which you do things. And that's what makes or breaks the karma then. Because if you whinge and complain about being a victim, then that will just create more karma. But if you can accept it and with understanding and good grace, then it will dissipate the karma, and that'll be the last you'll see of it. But we'll, if we read both those books, we'll have a much better understanding of karma.
It'd be good.
And, you know, I was reading about one particular person in Gina Germanara's book, Many Mansions, who had 2 readings, and he had multiple sclerosis and was virtually blind. And after the first reading, which gave all the treatments had started to work, but then they weren't working. And so he sought another reading, and that reading told him in no uncertain terms that just purely focusing on the physical remedies to get rid of the physical complaints will not eradicate the karmic situation that he was finding himself in. He has to look at the purposes, he has to change his whole attitude to life, because otherwise, he said, what do you want to get healed for? Just so you can turn around and continue to do the nasty things. Because his nurse had written to Edgar Cayce saying she'd never known someone with such a selfish attitude and such an ego as this person that she was trying to help. And Cayce just told him in no uncertain terms, you've got to change your attitude. Otherwise, what's the point of trying to heal yourself? Yeah. So I think that's, you know, the whole thing about illness is it has a purpose. And we've got to try and discern what that purpose is. Just trying to get rid of it.
Meditation.
Because, you know, taking a drug to relieve the symptoms of an illness is not necessarily getting to the bottom of what you've got it for in the first place. But that's what's all our what's going to be unveiled during our conference, I'm sure. Well, look, this has been very enlightening, but I'm starting to fade, and I think Alison's just about out on her feet.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you all for all your efforts.
Yep. Thank you for attending, Alison, to make 4 of us. Otherwise, there would just be 3 of us and
One
reading
audience.
to each other.
Right.
It was lucky, wasn't it?
Yeah.
These are our bedtime stories.
Yeah. We'll sleep on it.
That's great. All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you all soon. Some of you soon.
Tomorrow
I'll
night.
see some of you tomorrow night. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Everyone.
Bye,
Night.
everyone. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Love you all.
All right.